Hi, I'm Casey Love, and today we'll be painting the Trooper Premium Format figure by Sideshow. Let's get started.
To start out, I'll base Eddie's face, putting a wash down just to get the colors going in the right direction. All right, so now we've finished base coating the portrait. The next step is we will move into putting a wash. I'm gonna do like a dark brown wash, kind of a green brown here. And I'll usually just put it on and then wipe it off. This basically brings out all the detail so that we see everything. And I'll work in sections here as I go. This way I can kind of control how much goes on. It already starts to come to life right away. So with washes, you can just build up multiple layers if you want. You can do 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers. You can let this dry, do another layer. All right, so now we have the portrait really darkened up here and all the detail popping through, which is what we want. So that this will set us up for all the layers to come over top that we're gonna do. All right, so next we're gonna dry brush with the base color. So we just lightly take most of the paint off the brush, usually working against the grain of the sculpture. So if the details are traveling this way, then I'll usually go this way, the opposite way with the brush, so that it only is bringing out the top layers. And the reason you don't want too much paint on the brush when you do this is because you'll flood the areas that we put the wash. We don't want to do that. Definitely want to capture the art and essence of the album cover, but also give it a slight realistic twist to it. Now where the textures are really fine, like on top of the head here, I like to almost scrub it like this. And I use the brush at a sideways angle, and that prevents me from getting paint down into the fine details like this. There's little skin pores on his head. All right, there's Eddie so far. All right, so the next step, we're gonna do a very light overspray with the base color, and this will just lighten him up a little bit more. Want to be careful that we, again, don't lose too much of the first undertone wash. And that's all he needs. And then we're good to go to our next step. All right, now we're gonna just throw a little bit of a light yellow-green wash over, just to tone a little bit more. All right, there we go. So now after we've done a couple oversprays, we're gonna just hit a few spots with some highlights again with the dry brushing, but concentrating on just specific key areas, such as the brows, to this nasal fold from coming down from his nose, maybe the cheekbones, some of the major folds. All right, there we go. I'm gonna start putting in some of the dark cracks that are in Eddie's skull, and then also start adding in some of the shading and where the shading lands on the face and how it sits on there to kind of draw the dramatic shadows and things out that we see. Some of the key features, you know, the gums, the tongue, under the chin, and just pushing all the shadows, which will help bring the piece to a little bit more three-dimensional life. So now I'm switching to a green wash, and we're just going to emphasize some of these areas. Again, paying attention to the artwork that's been done for Trooper helps me to see some of these colors and push them and get it onto the sculpture. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of the shade, add a little straight black to this, just to darken this shade a bit. And this will become my darkest shading tone. And this will just be to push little areas that need that extra punch. Probably the darkest spot is back behind this neck. I'm gonna go back to my first shading green and just lightly overspray over this just to tone it a little bit back. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do with this color is I'm gonna angle the head down a bit like this, because what I wanna do is hit the hot highlight on top of the head, but I don't wanna lose everything I have underneath. You can also just mist his cheekbone a little bit there, any other hotter spots that need to catch. Now I'm gonna take this very light translucent green and I'm just gonna lightly blend this edge a little bit so it's not so crazy. Okay, so the next step is base coating the teeth. Very carefully go over each individual tooth just to highlight them. And just kind of bringing back a little highlight on this lower lip. I'm gonna use my finger to just smudge a little bit because that'll then soften that dry brush look a little bit. I'm gonna also tone this down with some shading. Just letting the brush kind of run over the high edges and catch on its own. I'm not really forcing it. I think now what we'll do is shade these teeth down. Now I'm gonna do it 2 steps here. One is washing them down with this real light shade of gray, because I don't want to knock the teeth totally out. Then I'll go in and do the rest with airbrush. Okay, now I'm gonna take black. I'm gonna add more alcohol to this to thin it further. And the reason is I want it to be really thin so that when I shade these teeth down, it's not gonna knock them out completely. It's just gonna kind of sink them down a little bit. Obviously the teeth towards the back are gonna get a little darker than towards the front. Some of this warm shaded brown very lightly in a couple spots. We're gonna paint the bolt on the forehead. So the first thing we're gonna do is paint this black. This way, once we apply the silver, it's going to pop really well over top of the black. Now we're gonna do silver. This is Iron Breaker silver. All right, so the next step, I'm just gonna put a little bit of wash on that bolt. Actually, I'm gonna use a gloss shade. It won't matte down the silver, but it will slightly darken it. So for the blood, I'm gonna use Tim Gore's Illustrator Bloodline Blood Red. So I'm just gonna apply a nice coat of this blood over top of this. He's sculpted in blood dripping down his face. I have to do this very carefully because it's a 3D sculpted thing, so there's these little edges. If you don't get it on, it'll look a little strange. But you can't obviously get the red on the face, so gotta be very slow about this. Now we're gonna hit the blood with a little bit of high gloss. So the last thing we're gonna do for Eddie here is we're going to paint his eyes, which are just these little orbs. And we're just gonna put basically a white pupil in. And what I have to do this is a toothpick that I've rounded the end off. Here's the normal sharp end. So I can just go in very carefully and just lay in some dots. So I'm gonna let those dry and then we'll come back and show you how they look. All right, so we've put one eye in. Now we're going to put the other eye in. Very carefully. All right, there we go. All right, so now his eyes are in and portrait is done.